guest, as you all know, is also a Vino Veritas regular, and it is our state representative, Pat Somerville. Everybody, please welcome Pat Somerville. Excellent. Tony, you don't mind sitting here on the panel while we finish up? Excellent, excellent. Well, Pat is one of the very first people I met moving to Michigan back in 2000. Well, I guess I moved here in 2004. It's my first political job, and one of the first guys I met is this guy that was the absolute dream volunteer. Anybody who's has been in the political, there's three classes of politics. There's the chattering class, there's the donor community, there's the actual politicians themselves, and then there's the staffer class. The staffer class, on the other hand, is constantly looking for great volunteers, and most of them are, that we say, there are walkers, talkers, and donors. And most volunteers are not super strong workers. They like to do a lot of the chatting instead. They like the cocktail crowd. When Pat came into the Victory Center, and this is in 2004, this person, he was the ideal. And he says, "Oh, I'll walk this area." Well, now I realize why it was that Pat was such a hard worker. It's because that's just the way he is. And it was that kind of work ethic that enabled Pat to, how many doors did you hit your first campaign? All of them?
Yeah, well over 15,000. That was obviously with a full-time job.
Excellent.
Wow.
Well, Pat is now a term limited. He's 3-0 on elections, and he's been an absolutely spectacular state representative for this district. But the first question I'm gonna pose to Pat is. For those of you who don't know Downriver, Detroit is a very purple district. When we talk about a highly red state or a blue state, Downriver is very purple. We say that it is white, blue-collar, hardworking, gun-toting, God-fearing, and they ought to be conservatives, but for the longest time, this has been a generationally Democrat area. So, but this is also the heart of the Reagan Democrat. And it almost seems like our movement has forgotten how to be a Reagan Republican, to be a real conservative, but is able to appeal to that center of folks that aren't really red and they're not really blue, but they're purple. And so Pat has masterfully negotiated. You know, you're a master as politics as the art of the possible. Tell us what it's like being a really good conservative in a thoroughly purple area.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is what I do is whenever I make decisions in the State House, it goes through a 4-phase process. Is it constitutional? Is it the role of government? What are the unintended consequences of what we're doing? And what feedback are we getting from the people? And that's where I have to draw the line, because the feedback from the people really plays in when you're dealing with a district that is a 47% Republican base. So I have to make up 3 points just to get back to 50. And so I'm already behind going in. And so at least that's the process I've gone through when making decisions in Lansing, whether it be how I vote on particular bills. But I think first and foremost...
Yeah, but Pat, in all fairness, your district is not 47% Republican when you get 60-some+% voting for you, sir. Right. It just gives you a sense, though. I mean, when I was running... All right. Yeah. When, who's counting? Yeah. But when I was working for Bush, we were right there on the cusp of things. And so when we realized that this is one of those districts that is so very, very important, it's not that we need someone that's just going to come out here and be this vocal, rigid ideologue that's going to get in everybody's face, but what we need is someone that's a statesman. And it's so great to have someone that's able to be a statesman, so fresh out of the gate.
Yeah.
But
well, and I think the key thing is there, especially being a politician when you're out there, it's listening is the first key. People just want to be listened to. I say people don't know how much you know, or don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. And so when you're there and you're going to listen to them, even though you might not necessarily agree with them, if you took the time to listen to them, to get to know them, hear what their concerns are, even though you might not agree on everything, they're still going to walk away and say, you know what, he was reasonable. I could vote for him just because of the fact that he came out to my door, he was willing to listen to me, and in the end we didn't agree on the particular policy, but at least I know where he stands. I know where he stands, and I'm not going to get wishy-washy answers and things of that nature. And so that's the approach that we've taken.
And that's what's so amazing is so many people that voted for you, they said, well, the reason I voted for Pat is because I actually met him, and I know that he's a good guy. And so those of you that are at all interested in becoming a representative someday, let's face it, the number one thing is to get out there and actually know who your swing voters are and be in front of them.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, she
Yeah,
was-
and actually, I got a cool story, because a lot of times we have staffers from Lansing and or even reps come down and help me walk in what we call CCP days, but it's where we get together, we come down and we go knock door to door and meet with constituents and things of that nature. Well, we had Representative Pasholka was actually down helping me out in the district. And he was funny because afterwards he's like, "I've got the perfect story, Pat. This is the perfect story for our campaign school and everything." So Representative Pasholka walks up to this guy's door. He's like, "Hi, I'm Representative Pasholka, walking on behalf of your state Representative Pat Somerville. He's doing a great job in Lansing." But he goes, he's like, "Let me tell you something about Pat Somerville." Turns around, he walks into the garage, pulls out 3 flyers. Comes
Oh, the
back
homeowner
out,
does.
The homeowner does. Goes in the
Okay.
garage, pulls out 3 flyers, comes out. He's like, "Pat Somerville is the only politician that has ever knocked on my door. He's the only Republican I've ever voted for, and I will continue to vote for him because he took that effort."
Wow.
And he was like, and then, you know, and Al sitting there like, I didn't even know what to say. I was like, okay, well, hey, I appreciate the support, you know, whatever. But that was a classic example, especially in this area, which has been predominantly Democrat. I mean, it's really, I was the first person to hold the seat in well over 20 years. And so I think even when we won in 2010, which was a banner year for Republicans, is that they took the seat for granted so much that they didn't do any work in the district. And when we flooded the district with our work and face-to-face and going to meetings, council meetings, attending church groups or Kiwanis groups and Rotary groups and all that stuff, here's somebody that's actually present versus them not seeing anybody present before, and that turned the tide. And we were able to, you know, hold it now for 6 years.
Well,
so.
and you've been accessible too. I mean, you go to all the forums and you take all the tough questions and you're out there and you've had lots of people attack you, but you've always had a poise. You've had a grace under fire and you're willing to say, "Hey, listen, you know, I don't necessarily agree with you on this and I don't necessarily agree with my own party on this." I mean, Pat and I are a few of the rare conservatives that are pro-union conservatives. Now, we're not necessarily pro-union conservatives in its current manifestations, but when we understand that that unions, for example, were the original intent of unions was actually quite conservative. It was the idea of how do we create a community of workers so that way they're not atomized, but rather, and think of what Friedrich von Hayek said. He said that if I were a businessman and unions weren't invented, I would want to invent them. I would want to have someone with whom I could speak on behalf of the worker. And so when we think about the original idea of unions, it goes back to the Guild, it goes back to the community, it goes back to those little platoons about which Edmund Burke writes. And so when conservatives here in Downriver are able to talk to the union man on his terms, it means a great deal to those types of folks. But of course, we also realize that the unions today are particularly the UAW, is becoming more and more, you're running more and more conservatives. I remember when we were running the 04 campaign, we had the union members for Bush coalition down here, and hundreds of union men showed up, despite the fact that they were getting a lot of heat from their guys. But as we see that, don't you find that there are more and more union generational Democrats that are willing to listen to the conservative argument because they see their jobs are leaving, they see this decay, and as you were mentioning earlier, they're not finding the leadership that used to be here in Downriver,
Right.
That's going to lead us into the next Downriver.
Right, and what you're seeing actually is amongst the rank, you're seeing, especially when we're dealing with the right to work issue, some of the other issues, what we noticed was it wasn't necessarily the young worker was the one that was fighting for the union. It was actually the retirees.
Mm.
Because I think obviously they grew up through all of that consternation back with the auto industry and all the different, whether it be the steel industry, all that kind of stuff. And I think they saw the working conditions. Like if I ever talked to my grandfather, you know, he would always talk about that. Well, this is what they used to do to us, and this is why the union's necessary. And then I have to kindly remind him that, well, there's laws in place that protect you now, and really the role of the union was to represent you, the member. And it's turned into a political machine, is what's happened. And the young members are starting to realize that and say, you know what, these individuals, this union, whatever, is not representing me, the actual worker. They're off making decisions without my input.
Yeah, it's like the
And they're
teachers
starting to
union.
recognize it.
The teachers union is really only an institution that exists for the convenience of itself now.
Right.
And so you have this tremendous battle between the organized versus the unorganized, and it's always the unorganized who just want to be left alone
Right.
so they can go about doing their own thing. They come out the hard way. So Pat, you're term limited. This is a tough seat. This is Dingle country. What's next for you, my friend?
That's the question I get all the time.
Yes.
And I know when I go out and speak to groups, it's probably not political in nature in this area, at least for the time being. I don't rule it out, obviously, anytime in the future, because I believe that areas change, and we can change hearts and minds. And so when I go out and I talk to individuals, the three main things that I talk about that I think really need to change in terms of the way we do things now, whether it be government or entrepreneur or whatever, there's three things I always talk about. The first one is skilled trades, because we've gone down a path of assuming or telling our young children and high school students that they have to go to college in order to be successful, and that can't not be farther from the truth. I know there's a couple stats that are out there. I believe there's 3 million available jobs right now in the United States, and only about 10% of those require a 4-year degree.
Wow.
And so the problem,
Is that right?
absolutely, and so the problem that we're running into is that we have a lot of small business owners that need workers. The problem is the kids don't have the skills they need to fill those positions. And so we've moved away from this, that everybody, we moved away from this, let everybody kind of chart their own path to, no, you've got to all fit in the same funnel. We all have to go to college and become, these lemmings that just go off the cliff. And now we're starting to see, and I think it's really one of the next bubbles.
Yes,
the
next
first
bubble,
one's it's the college debt bubble, but the other one's the government debt bubble.
Yes.
That's the other. Those are the two bubbles that are still left. And so that's the first one I talk about. The second one is subsidiarity, and that involves government.
It's one of my favorite topics.
One of the favorite topics, right? We talk about this all the time.
All the time.
And it's funny because it doesn't matter whether you talk to a Republican, whether you talk to a Democrat, Independent, whatever they are, they believe in the principle of subsidiarity. And when I explained to them, I was like, look, the founders.
Explain it.
Yeah, and so what and it actually came from the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And it was actually through charity. And what they understood was like, look, what can be, or what can best be done is normally at the local level, because there's more accountability. And the thing is
No, they got their fingers to the
and
pulse
it's,
of the
and it's
community.
closer to the people.
Right,
They understand what the needs of their own community are. Well, that expands to government. Because when I explained this to people, I was like, look, understand this. I was like, the founders understood this. That's the reason why they set up a republic. Because they understood, well, not only does the federal government have a role, but I agree it should have only been one role, and that's national defense. That was their main purpose. And then some trade.
Yeah.
They had some
You had
commerce.
6 aims of the council.
You had some commerce, right, because they wanted to protect us from foreign nations and pitting states against one another and whatnot. But the states, they believe, should really, their only role was public safety, justice, education, because of course if someone wasn't educated, they resorted to be a criminal. And then you had, and then we have infrastructure, roads, bridges, things of that nature. But everything else, they believe, everything else that can be done at the local level should be done at the local level. And in a lot of cases, they were like, it shouldn't even be done by government. There were different leadership roles, whether it be a church community, or whether it be a business community, or whether it be philanthropic groups, things of that nature that were best dealt with by the private sector. And then if there was an issue, they would all get together and how many have seen Little House on the Prairie? Right? I actually had to go back and watch one because somebody I was reading something and they said, yeah, it's amazing how we've changed the way that government has operated in our lives, because it used to be the federal government was very limited. The states had the power, they were sovereign. But more importantly, the locals, they kind of did what they wanted to do as long as they weren't trampling on each other's rights. And when they did have an issue, they'd all get together in a little town hall meeting, like they would in Little House on the Prairie, and they'd work it out right inside their little meeting and say, hey, this is what we're going to do going forward. And so
the laboratories of democracy worked that way.
That's right. That's right.
Whereas now, what do we see? We see we see the standardizers talking about replicating best practices, not because they're best practices, but rather because that's how you amass control in the country.
That's right.
So this is, and you seem like, you surely have read Robert Nisbet's work. I mean, Pat and I have, it's just so great because Pat and I have read so many of the same books, and it's so wonderful to have that philosophy, to find a politician that actually has the philosophical foundation to understand what he's talking about. But the idea of subsidiarity, Albert J. Knox said that the big difference, the thing to understand is that there's social authority. We might say that Ryan is an authority on Roger Scruton, for example, but that's completely different than power. Authority is something that we voluntarily bestow upon someone, whereas power is something that is politically usurped by a government. And so when we understand, as Robert Nesbitt says, that these intermediate authorities of the local community are so much more important than political power. And Albert J. Nock, which is where I started with, is Albert J. Nock said that for every increase in political power, there is a necessary decrease in social authority. So the voluntary community constantly is being transferred into political despotism or tyranny or oppression or just the totalist state. And so fewer and fewer is the size of the sphere of immunity from the control of the state for the individual, and more we just get converted into machines that serve the state. So
Yeah, and the last point on subsidiarity, I'll move on to the
Yeah.
third point.
Yeah.
But it's all about balances of power. And what I mean by that is it's giving power back to the people, and this is what I mean by this. When you push all of the responsibilities, or the majority of the responsibilities, back to the local forms of government, you as an individual, and let's just say you live here on Groseal. Groseal is comprised of about 10,000 people. Your one vote goes farther amongst that 10,000 people than it does if you
great point.
if you go to the state level, which for me, it's 90,000 people. Now your one vote matters less amongst that group of 90,000 people. Well, when you're voting for Congress, which is 740,000 people, your one vote even is watered down and diluted even more. And so when the power has been centralized more to the state and the federal, it gives you, the individual, less power and less say over what's going on. And so that's why it's so critically important that we get back to that foundation and saying, you know what, no, we can figure this stuff out at the local level, and and then people can vote with their feet, as Milton Friedman would say, walk with their feet, because you know what, hey, Groseal, you're screwing up, I'm going to move over to Trenton. And it's a lot easier, remember, it's a lot easier for you to move from Trenton to Groseal than it is, oh, well, what if the state screws it up? Now I got to move to Ohio or somewhere else. And so it's a lot
It's even harder to
go
move
through
to Costa Rica.
And that's right. And that's right. And if the federal government screws it up, then where do you go? Cuba? I mean, you go across the so that's it's critically important, and that's more people need to study that, just that aspect of it. I wish they.
Well, I think you've been very eloquent today about that. That's really good. Keep that
and the
power
third-
and authority on the local level.
And the third and the most, I think, is the most important. What I talk about is entrepreneurialism, entrepreneurship, because I think in this country, that's really what we were. That was the foundation of it. I mean, people came here to be independent.
That's right.
It's very difficult to be a part of an independent nation when you have a bunch of dependent people. And what I mean by that is, even if you're an employee, think about it. You're depending on somebody else for your welfare. I mean, for your paycheck, whatever it is. And if you rewind, even going back to the early 1900s, a little over 90% of the people in this country owned their own business.
Yeah.
They were farmers, agriculture, and a lot of it was like that, but a lot of them jumped into, a lot of the industry and things of that nature that were kind of evolving. But you fast forward to today, and less than 10% of the people in this country own their own business. And so what that's really doing is it's creating that gap between rich and poor, because when you have fewer and fewer companies, if I'm an employee, I can't exactly shop around for the best wage if you only have a few employers to compete with in terms of wages. And so the further we go in this direction, and the further people depend on somebody else, to run, their own business and to work for them, the bigger gap we're going to create between this rich and poor. And so I've tried to get out there and get people to realize, and even through the school system, we don't teach it. It's been basically set up to everybody needs to go to college, and college doesn't teach that either.
No.
They're teaching, it's like when
You're certainly not going to learn
No.
the valor of entrepreneurism in today's university.
And when it's funny, I always use the joke. When I went to the University of Michigan, which
We don't hold that against you.
They don't hold that against me. I'm an Ohio State grad, but I thought they were going to teach me how to be a millionaire. And then I got there, and I'm like, well, wait, they're just. All I'm doing is I'm going to have a degree that's going to give me the right to interview for a job. And so they didn't really teach me any of the real life skills or things that you needed to know to really make it out in the real world. And so
Hayek said that the cultural shift was that it used to be that the man that employed 100 people was looked at as a hero, and now he's looked at as a villain.
Sure.
But yet the man that commands 100 men, because he's got the government job, is now the hero, and that's actually tremendous. But so how do you take a 15 bedroom communities in Downriver and make them entrepreneurial when they're used to working for big
Well,
growth.
I think the first thing is leading by example, and that kind of goes into what you were asking me what I'm going to do, and that's kind of the path I'd like to take.
So you definitely want to go into economic development, work with the chambers, and
Sure.
try to
And then be
create
your
the
own
kind
business
of
owner.
Yeah.
Yep.
See, and
Yep.
you're a big Hayekian, so you know that whole concept of that. Really, all we can do. I love the idea of that. The Keynesians are trying to create economic growth like a gardener who would try to nail leaves to a tree. Hayek says that the real job of an economist is like a gardener, is to know the kind of conditions that are favorable to growth. And then you're doing the job of weeding and amending the soil, and you're creating the environment in which good things can happen rather than trying to force it the way that we've so often seen from the folks that are doing that command and control economy. So, but what do you think are the steps to that?
Yeah.
Then?
Well, I think the first thing you got to lead by example. So you got to be doing it on your own, and then so that's the first step. But I think at that point, once you've established yourself, I think you have to do it through education, and one of it is can you get into the schools early, especially the high schools, as they're starting to reach that 9th grade level, to get them to understand, like, you can be your own boss. You can get out there and be your,
The schools Downriver are going to allow unapologetic
I don't know if they would
capitalists to come
necessarily
in.
allow it within the institution,
Yeah.
but you could always get in there and work with the groups that are already there, and hold off-site meetings, things of that nature. Hold, whatever you want to call them, incubator meetings or whatever they are.
Okay.
But I think it's important, especially people, and I think especially the young people, they're more of that rebel at nature kind of thinking, and they have to understand, it's like, look, you have great ideas, don't be afraid to fail. Because I think too often our school systems teach, oh, no, red mark, bad. But really, that's what you need to be doing. You learn more from your mistakes than you do from your victories. And so I think we got to encourage people to go out there and make mistakes. Because unfortunately our system is set up the opposite.
That's great. You're going to allow yourself to be roasted at the Reagan Day dinner upcoming for the congressional district? Wow, how many politicians are willing to do that? Since Reagan, I don't think there's been any, have there? None at all. So, questions for our representative, Jeanette.
It's hard to contain myself. So there's a little bit of a flaw.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what your problem is. And something, as far as education is concerned, something that's not being taught. And it's funny because I just made a comment about this in my Facebook page because I actually teach a government class
Oh, yeah.
to homeschoolers, because they would never allow me to teach in public schools, across schools, is the fact of the fourth branch of government, the large bureaucracy
Sure.
that limits people from being entrepreneurs. So the overburdensome regulation, now we're seeing it even in the jobs with you, but I mean, if you listen to interviews with any of these, Fortune 500 companies, Home Depot or Best Buy, all these CEOs of these companies saying they would not be able to start the company the way they did 30 years ago. And so
Great point that she brings up, because what we find ourselves in, and I've been very much against the governor and a lot of other things that even we as Republicans have done since taking office even 4 years ago, and that has to do with the corporate welfare aspect of it. And what it's doing is you're really creating this crony capitalism environment where they use a non-regulatory environment to build their business, and then they go to the government to put the regulations in place to pull the drawbridge up to protect themselves from any competition. And so it's a major issue, and whether you're talking about regulatory or licensing is really the big thing. That we've wanted to license all these different kinds of occupations. Oh, you don't need to do this. This goes back to the point in terms of the financial planners. It's like people are going to choose based on the results that they got by using your service.
That's right.
And so I don't go to my mechanic because he's a licensed mechanic.
Right.
I go to my mechanic because he fixes my car.
Right, but we're becoming more and more lazy as consumers. Where if he's got a plaque on the wall, he's got that certificate, he must be goddamn Harry, and that ends up. The truth of the matter is what we're really doing is we're just having that standards lowered.
Well, but the problem, and it's to her point, is you're creating these barriers of entry where someone that wants to go out and be an entrepreneur, they're like, well, wait a minute, I got to go around all of this nonsense. Well, that was put in place for a reason. It was to protect the other people from competition.
It's like
it's a major problem. And it's even
because in my opinion, and the joke in my government classes is the fourth branch government is the EPA.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not even entering into entrepreneurship. It's one of the reasons, in my opinion, and in my research, that we have lost manufacturing jobs in this country. You got people that are, squabbling about $15 an hour minimum wage. Those jobs were never meant to be minimum wage.
That's
What we
right.
need to ask are, where are all the manufacturing jobs?
Sure.
And with the news that just came out of Washington now, that's actually going to get worse. The only jobs that we're going to have, because of the bureaucracy of the regulation that they are not accountable to anybody with the regulations, with
Sure.
the trillions of dollars of burden they put on not only businesses but the people, there's no one to rein them in.
Mhm.
Hence the REINS Act, right? So,
Right. Well, and there are avenues. I mean, he brought up the rules. Law trumps rules. You have the executive branch. The founders believed in legislative supremacy, and they
right,
believe in that
but
for a reason.
legislators advocate their
I understand,
responsibility.
and I'm not
to-
saying that.
and-
So
and they do the same thing with the president with executive
That's right.
orders. They're making the federal government is making
Sure.
or the Congress is actually neutering themselves, making them
That's right,
irrelevant.
that's right.
And
And
that's what we have.
there's two ways you can address the issue. One, you can either write law, which is of course lawmakers, and we have to hold our lawmakers accountable. The other one is for Congress, and it's in the area of appropriations. You can defund those organizations. So
I
for
wonder if the
example,
Republican in Congress right now
well,
does that.
we've sent letters, we've sent resolutions to Congress and everything, but that's another major aspect of it. I mean, even if you've got a rogue president, the Congress still has to appropriate the funds for even the presidents, or for the president's office. And so if you even had to run away all these czars and all this other stuff, well, you fix that by defunding them. We have the power, the Congress has the power of the purse.
That's right.
The problem is the Congress hasn't had the cojones to actually go after and use that power to say, you know what, no, this isn't right, and you know what, we control the people's money. And this is what we think you should get, and you do that by defunding, but of course you gotta have the political will to go in that direction. And where does some of that political will come from? Educated voter,
Yeah.
which is voting the right person in office.
That's right.
And then that goes even back to the other aspects of, getting the power or the sovereignty back to the states. You willingly have to have congressmen that are going to willingly give up their power and say, look, this isn't the
Yeah.
role of the federal government, well, let's push this stuff back to the states. But you need
A
a
Goldwater.
congressman.
You need Goldwater
That's
that
right, you
says,
need a
my job
congressman
is
that
not
has
to
the-
write new laws, my job is to repeal bad laws.
That's right.
And until we find someone that has the courage to come up and say, and start doing that type of thing, and saying this is why they're bad.
Right.
But this is the old adage, and this is how, and Pat and I were steeped together in a lot of this philosophy through the New Centurions, but it's the idea that we want to blame the politicians, when really we ought to blame the fact that the folks in the districts don't know what they're voting for. And so if they knew what they were voting for, they wouldn't stand for some of the stuff that's being pulled on them. Doug had a question. Whose phone is ringing? The MVP's phone is ringing all at once. And this kind of goes back to that whole thing Jeanette was talking about, is that they're making it harder and harder for the little guy to compete against the big guy.
Right.
I mean, you think about the grocery stores, it's always a big joke. They're the ones that are lobbying for health standards. Why? Because the farmer's market can't put everything in plastic, in this expensive plastic. So you see this, it's the old unholy alliance between big business
Right.
and big government, and who gets screwed out of it? I mean, it's
guys.
almost everybody else.
Right.
So, someone else had a question.
On the topic of repealing bad laws,
Yeah.
what hope do the voters have of getting rid of term limits so
Uh-huh.
that the people of this place, if it is their will,
Yeah.
could continue to elect you?
Yeah.
Representative.
Well, it's rare.
Oh wait, before he answers,
Yeah.
how many of you are in favor of term limits, by show of hands? I'd say that's a little more than half. How many are against term limits? Okay.
Okay, can I?
Okay, no,
Mr.
no,
Chamberlain here?
let Pam answer the question first. Let
Okay.
Pam answer the question first.
Slim to none, and the reason for that is because the perception with politicians is just very bad. They just see us as crooks. I mean, obviously, anything that's done, by the one crooked politician is painted all over, whether it be CNN or Fox News or whatever it is. And so, right, exactly. Well, it's everybody, and so they all every job classification has their bad actors. Unfortunately, I think it's accelerated at our level, and so I don't see that happening anytime soon. Now, there were some efforts, and I'm kind of in agreement with this, because what we have here in the state of Michigan is term limits in regards to you can serve 6 years in the House, and then you can go over and you can run for the Senate, and you can serve 8 years in the Senate. I've been out there saying, well, I wouldn't be opposed to lifting it to 16 years, and you can serve in any capacity. which means I could continue to serve in the House and let somebody else run for Senate or whatever. And so, because the problem that we run into now, at least in the state capitol in Lansing, is all of the experience is on the Senate side.
Right.
Because most people, other than Senator Colbeck, you usually don't start in the Senate. You usually start out in the House and then you graduate to the Senate. And so what ends up happening is you have an imbalance of experience because the House is churning over people every 2, 4, 6 years, versus the senators have normally served in the House.
I mean,
And
the
so
argument I make, and we'll certainly let you make your comment, Jeanette, but the idea that we are hollowing out all the institutional wisdom is taking place here. And so when you think of particularly with the House, is you have most of the men go to the House, trying to figure out how it is they're going to get the next Senate seat. And as we all remember Milton Friedman say, there's no better way, or there's no worse way of having decisions be made than by people who are not going to be held accountable for those decisions. And so when that's a curse that comes with politics. But when we have someone that really wants to do their job as a state rep for a long time, it takes a lot of effort to get to know your district in the first place. And so when we take them out of that, or we put them on a fast track where the only thing they see ahead of them is what's my next seat, you don't have people focused on doing the job that they have today. Jeanette?
Well, I think my point is actually more towards the federal government as far as the lifetime politicians and because I personally think that Michigan needs a part-time legislature. And it's the entitlements that happen afterwards with lifelong politicians that I have an issue with. It's not having a decent representative that's representing the voice of the people being in office for 20 years. It's the power that they usurp after being in office for so long.
And it's that so many of them, even good conservatives, they get to DC and they might be all starry-eyed and be idealistically driven, but then the party chairman sits down with them and says, well, that's all fine that you said all that stuff to get elected, but let me tell you how it works in DC, and it's a good old boys club, and if you really want to, the most important thing to them is to be reelected, which is in a way a good thing, because it does keep them at least somewhat in check by their community. They're not just their own person, but yet again, they're not just a delegate either. So I got to ask the question about the Prop A. What were your thoughts about that terrible?
Well,
you were for that,
yeah, in fact, I was even against it, putting it onto the ballot in the first place, because one, it's just being irresponsible.
If something ends up as a referendum, that means basically the legislators were unwilling to do their job. Right?
Well, I have to put some truth out on this, because if the plan was to raise revenue for roads, and let's just say the solution, and I'm saying it's the best solution, but if the solution was to raise the sales tax from 6 to 7% or 6 to 6.5%, whatever it is,
would have been a clean bill.
And if it was a clean bill, in order to raise the sales tax, you need a vote of the people. It's constitutional. And so that aspect of it would have to be done.
Sure.
But this is where everything got muddied up. Does anybody know how you get something to the ballot through the legislature?
Well, some majority decides to
Not
put
the majority, it's 2/3, right? So you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, signature of the governor, then it has to go to the vote of the people. That's what's required of a constitutional change.
Oh, for a constitutional change.
Correct, because that's what you're doing, because the sales tax
That's
is in the
right.
Constitution.
Right, okay.
So what happens with this is, I ask people, well, how many House members did we have? And they don't know, and I'm like, we had 59. Is that 2/3? No. So guess what we had to do in order to get 2/3 votes? 2/3 of the way there.
Butter it up.
You had to butter it up. And that's where your EITC came from, that's where your education funding came from, that's where the public transportation funding came from. You needed those aspects in the bill in order to get the 2/3, to get it out of the House, to get it to the Senate, through the governor, to the people. And so that's what we saw, but I think the people, and good for them, for sifting through I can just call it BS, sifting through the BS and saying, you know what, no, we're not necessarily, we're in favor of potentially even raising revenue for roads, but we need it to go to roads, and we only want it to go to roads. We don't want money going off in all these other functions. It's like, look, focus on one issue. If the issue is roads, let's fund our roads.
That's right.
And so I think that was the reason for the 80-20. I was not expecting that. I was expecting about a 60-40 kind of a split. When those numbers came in fact, I was like, that can't be right. And then I'm looking at them and all the precincts are in. I'm like, wow, okay, that is right. So It's an issue that we're dealing with right now. I feel that the House Republicans put out a good plan. It basically involves taking existing money, prioritizing, really taking away from not only individual welfare but corporate welfare, as well as the only thing that could really be talked about as a tax increase is right now the way we fund our roads is when you go to the pump at the state level, you pay a 19-cent per gallon tax. Currently, diesel, if you're a truck and you use diesel fuel, you only pay 15 cents per gallon. So our plan would bring the 15 cents up to 19 cents, and it would tie it to inflation. So it would start to index the cent per gallon so that we don't fall into this hole again.
And they would just pass that price on to the cost of everything we buy anyhow.
Exactly.
So.
And you're paying for it at the gas pump, but all that money's going into roads.
Right.
And then what we'd be doing is we would be taking our forecasted revenue increases, 60% of that money would be diverted into roads and bridges.
Okay.
And so, and the positive thing about that is we can, with that money, we can divert the Act 51 formula, which right off the top, 10 to 15% of it is siphoned off into public transportation, bike trails, things of that nature. So we're able to put all that money into what we call the bottom three buckets, and that goes to MDOT, the counties, and cities. And so it's going to get directly more to roads and bridges. And so that was a plan that we unveiled. It was about a $1.1 billion plan to get there over 4 years. And so I thought it was a great plan because it didn't involve a lot of tax increases. It was taking a lot of money that we're already spending on economic development and welfare and other forms, and we're diverting that over into something that really is the role of government, and that's infrastructure. And so, and then tying the future growth of revenues to the general fund is forcing lawmakers to prioritize spending. It's to focus on what is the
That's
priority.
the last thing they want to do, though.
I understand that. Yeah, they want to fund all
Because
the
the
pet
last thing they
projects.
want to do is have to tell anybody no.
That's right.
This Repka talks about how so many people come to believe in a fourth dimension out of which the funds come. They don't realize that
Right.
it's still got to be accounted for.
Yeah.
Ryan gets the last question,
Oh,
and he actually knows Roger Scruton. He's met him a few times. I'm very
Nice.
impressed. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm totally envious.
well, how much, in your experience, dealing with those day-to-day questions of cultural shift, because you're dealing with people on the local level, does culture, I put it this way, does your experience tell you that politics and what people would generally support is kind of just a reflection of the culture, or is it something culture is the river and politics is the bottom, and everything flows down towards politics? Is that the kind of thing that you find, or do you find it's more of an interaction?
Yeah, what's your sense of that at the stoop?
To be honest with you, most people aren't even, they don't care anything about other than what's for dinner. That's kind of the first problem. I mean, for example, I'll just take you through when I go up to a door. You know, I'm knocking on a door. Hi, Pat Somerville, your state representative. Just walking around the community today. What's important? Yeah, right, exactly, Pat. Well, actually, a lot of them actually do. Pat, you've been here 5 times. So I do get a lot of that. So, but what's important to you at the state level? You know, I haven't really thought about it. That's about 99% of the responses.
But how much of that is because you spend so much time because you know where your swing vote is and you spend so much time?
Oh no, I knock on all
yeah.
voters.
I knew you did that the first campaign. I didn't
Right.
realize you were doing it. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, I knock on Democrats.
But let me try to answer his question with the way that Lee Edwards taught in Cleveland Whitney, that we need to understand politics is a process. It's the 4 Ps. That first it starts with a philosophy. The philosophers come up with the ideas, and they're pre-political. And if the philosophers are making a lot of sense, then the pamphleteers, the second Ps, the William F. Buckleys, the Crystals, the Brian writes for the Weekly Standard. So you have the folks that popularize the philosophers' ideas. And then finally, once the public has accepted those popularized ideas from pamphleteers, then, and only then, does the politician jump into the spotlight and try to embody those ideas. And so as I was mentioning earlier, so often we want to argue and complain about the politicians when really it's the public. And if the public believes what they believe because the pamphleteers have fallen down on their job, and the pamphleteers have fallen down on their job because they have not repaired to the actual philosophy. And so we constantly see this cycle where the pamphleteers are looking backwards towards philosophy to find out what is our founding principles. So the question to yours, I mean, you're asking about how does one affect a cultural shift? Well, the cultural shift starts first of all with making a decision on what philosophies we're gonna adhere to, and then finding the pamphleteers that will popularize them. Because only if philosophies are popularized will we ever be able to elect a politician that will be able to implement them. And that's enough alliteration for one day. Folks, again, thanks for coming out, and thanks again for Pat Somerville and Tony Longeves.